Pea Patch Island, located just across the river from New Jersey, was first used as a private hunting ground by New Jersey resident Dr. Henry Gale, as it was deeded to him through the state of New Jersey. In 1794, the island had been discovered by a French military engineer, Pierre Charles L'Enfant, who was surveying land for possible military defense sites. Seeing it as the perfect site for a defensive fort, the United States Army offered Gale $30,000 for it, a boatload of money at the time. Dr. Gale refused to sell on principle, so the determined men of the Army went to the state of Delaware, who claimed the entire Delaware River and all its islands within a 12-mile circle around Newcastle's courthouse. The Delaware legislature passed an act that gave Pea Patch Island to the federal government, which seized it from Gale via eminent domain. In 1838, a descendant of Dr. Gale, James Humphrey of New Jersey, challenged Delaware's right to the island. After making the circuit court rounds, there were two different court rulings that contradicted each other. President Polk suggested the use of an arbitrator. John Sargent was appointed arbitrator, and in late 1847 he heard arguments from the United States team represented by Senators John M. Clayton and James A. Bayard Jr., and James Humphrey's team, represented by former Secretary of War John Eaton and former Secretary of the Treasury George M. Bibb. On January 15, 1848, John Sargent ruled that the island had belonged to the state of Delaware, and therefore the title given to the United States government was valid. In other words, Delaware had the right to claim the island, and that New Jersey had no right to deed Delaware's island to anyone. The first fort, designed in a star shape, had a rough start in 1819 to 1824 because the builders didn't understand the challenges of building on marshy land. The piles were improperly installed, and the marsh was a big hindrance. The 43,000 installed bricks started to crack, so they all had to be taken down. After that, a fort was built that worked until a fire in 1831 burned it to rubble. Fortunately, this rubble didn't go to waste, as it was used to reinforce the seawall that went around the island of Pea Patch. In 1848, the new irregular pentagon-shaped fort was started, under the direction of highly skilled French engineers who understood what was needed to build on marshy land. When Fort Delaware was finished, it was a solid structure, ready to serve forever. It was basically finished in 1860, just in time for the Civil War. The focus of the building plan during the Civil War was bringing in guns and cannons. Confederate soldiers captured at Gettysburg were the first Southern guests at Fort Delaware. Just north of the Delaware fort, their L-shaped barracks were built, along with barracks for Union soldiers who were stationed there. A hospital was also built that treated all soldiers, Union and Confederate. They were fed twice a day with enough untasty food to keep them alive. Fruits and vegetables were not available. If a Confederate soldier could prove that he was drafted, he was allowed to take an oath of loyalty to the Union and become part of the 1st Delaware Heavy Artillery to help defend the fort against attack. Captain All had obtained permission from the War Department to form this battery of ex-Confederate soldiers. Confederate privates and non-commissioned officers lived in these barracks, while officers and commanders were kept inside the fort, where food and living conditions were of higher quality. While they were basically treated as human beings, as long as they followed the rules, there were big health hazards here. What killed some were the diseases that spread through both Union and Confederate ranks because of close quarters, overcrowding, malnutrition, lack of clean water, and vitamin C. Out of the 33,000 that were held here as POWs, nearly 2,700 died from dysentery, scurvy, and smallpox. The remains of these 2,700 souls are buried in a mass grave in New Jersey, never to see their native states again. They are buried far from their families. It is called Finn's Point National Cemetery. In 1910, a towering 85-foot tall granite obelisk was erected to mark the grave, joining a smaller temple-like monument to the 135 Union Guards who also died on the island. On the other side of the obelisk, marble tombstones mark the graves of 13 German POWs who died during World War II at New Jersey's Fort Dix. During the Civil War, POWs had no Geneva Convention rules for prisoners of war, so their treatment in captivity was up to their captors. After the Confederate Army put Union POWs on the front line ahead of their defending troops at Charleston, revenge was planned by Union authorities. 600 Confederate POWs at Fort Delaware were taken down to Fort Pulaski in Georgia, where they were badly treated and where some of them starved to death. This deadly treatment was the norm there until calmer minds were in control, and they began to feed them again. but not before some died from starvation. A lot of people in Delaware thought the starvation orders were over the top and didn't see them as humane treatment. At Fort Delaware, while rations were cut in retaliation, the commander of Fort Delaware let the Confederate prisoners catch fish to supplement their diet. Also, the kind people in towns near Fort Delaware sent care packages to prisoners on both sides, probably fresh fruit and vegetables, and other basic necessities. Scurvy deaths may have been higher if not for the generous care packages delivered. After the last Confederate POW left Fort Delaware, a skeleton crew was left behind until 1870, when the fort was deserted for a time. In 1898, it was reactivated during the start of the Spanish-American War. It was thought that the Spanish fleet was planning to attack the east coast area of America. So, outside the fort, engineers built more rapid-fire batteries that were completed after the war had ended. Battery Allen was named for a cavalry officer, Robert Allen, who died at the Civil War battle at Gaines' Mill. Battery Albertus, honest William Albertus, killed in the Mexican-American War. Battery Dodd honored Captain Albert Dodd, who also died at the Gaines' Mill battle. Battery Hentig honors cavalry officer Edmund Hentig, who died in Arizona fighting Native Americans in 1881. During the summer of 1898, artillery soldiers from the 4th U.S. Artillery and volunteers from Company 1 of the 14th Pennsylvania Volunteer Infantry Regiment were stationed at Fort Delaware, ready to defend against Spain if need be. Their names are carved into the brick walls inside the fort. Again, a caretaking crew was left behind after the short-lived Spanish-American War, but the fort was not fully closed like before. It was still needed for defense. Fort Delaware and Fort Mott served as sub-posts during World War I, with the main defense site being Fort DuPont. After World War I, the slow process of mothballing Fort Delaware began. Some guns were buried on the island, others went to other more modern forts, and some were sent elsewhere to become war memorials. Some original cannons were left. During World War II, more guns were taken to be used elsewhere. Battery Hentig still had its rapid-fire guns and an artillery detachment from Delaware's National Guard. However, these guns were taken in 1942 to Fort Mills, leaving Fort Delaware completely unarmed, unless you count the 8-inch Columbiad guns that still fires for visitors at the Northwest Bastion. Next to be taken away was the electrical wiring. Predictably, by the end of World War II, Fort Delaware was considered surplus property, and was sold back to the state of Delaware in 1947. In 1951, Fort Delaware State Park was created, including the entire Peapatch Island. Delaware restored the fort to be enjoyed by all and serve as a historical education museum. In 1999, it was discovered that beach erosion was threatening the foundation of the fort. The Army Corps of Engineers got to work and built a 3,500-foot seawall during the winter of 2005-2006. This wall not only protects Fort Delaware, but also a huge migratory bird rookery. Fort Delaware State Park can be reached by the taking of the fort's ferry crossing at Delaware City. A lot of prisoners have been held here, including pirates, war privateers, political prisoners, and Confederate soldiers. Most of the spirits seen here come from that time period. Pirates were held in punishing conditions, as were some unruly POWs. Health conditions, overcrowding, and poor food offerings in the barracks caused weakened immune systems and vitamin deficiencies, which led to the spread of preventable diseases as well as smallpox. Human bondage that includes cruel treatment often causes human pain and misery, violence, and death. Spirits from the Civil War era still hang around and let the living know they are there. People have heard moaning and the sounds of clanging chains from the prisoners held there long ago in unpleasant conditions. Many people have seen apparitions with all their parts throughout the dungeon area. Shadow people have also made themselves known. They have been known to dart down tunnels and doorways. Spirits have poked and pulled at the living to let them know they are still there. It seems that the spirits of pirates who are caught and imprisoned here also hanging around the place. A park ranger was quite surprised one day to see a pirate, dressed in a beautiful green silk shirt and white silk pants, looking out a window at the fort, wistfully yearning to be free, perhaps unaware that he had died. Spirits of Confederate soldiers may still be residing in their old barracks or on the land where the barracks once stood. They may still think they are POWs and are patiently waiting for the war to be over, so they can go home to their loved ones. They may not want to accept their deaths here. Under the ramparts and the parade grounds, fleeing Confederate soldiers have been spotted by the living, perhaps an emotional imprint of a failed escape attempt. Cannon and gunfire are still heard by the living. Apparently, the apparition of a hardworking cook is still seen cooking and preparing meals here. Footsteps of an unseen presence and the clanging of cooking utensils can also be heard as well. Thank you for making our way through the video. If you like this video, hit that like and subscribe button and let me know what you think by commenting down below. And until next time.